It's crazy to reflect back on my whole career here in the self-publishing business. And it all started out in 2014. And I will tell you that I was overwhelmed at all the information. So if you're ever overwhelmed, hey, you're not alone by any stretch. And there are just so many experts out there, and I put quotation marks around some of these experts, and other ones I truly do get behind that. You've got the likes of, Mark Dawson, Brian Cohen, Brian Meeks, all these people who have established a legacy, not only for themselves as authors, but as the go-to authorities in self-publishing. And so that's with great pleasure that I actually bring today's guest, Joanna Penn. She is an illustrious person in and of herself, but it's so amazing that she's so prolific with all of the content that she's put out over the years. So she's been in many interviews before, and she's answered just about everything about self-publishing. So this time I wanted to kind of take a departure away from us talking about self-publishing with her, because you can always read scores of her books or go check out her podcast, The Creative Pen. But to me, I would like to see and hear more from Joanna about the craft of writing. How did she become prolific? What makes her work so compelling? That's what really was burning in my mind. And so without any further ado, let's jump right into the interview with Joanna Penn. Under your pen name, J.F. Penn, you've written dozens of books. I mean, I'm just blown away at the number. What is the secret to writing so much? Because in addition to J.F. Penn, you also have Joanna Penn, and there's dozens more books.
Well, I think the big secret is time in the market, because I started writing for publication in 2006. So as we record this, it's been over 15 years. And since I have like 35-ish books. So if you, it's only a couple a year, to be honest. And I've been full time since 2011. So I guess that's one answer, which is time in the market really is important. And I mean, you talk a lot about book marketing. It's important for marketing, brand building, writing craft, audience building, everything. So that would be one thing. The other thing around fiction particularly, although non-fiction, I know you have some shorter books and box sets and things like that, is what my profile looks like on Amazon, for example, or my website. The book covers for a short story are exactly the same size as the book covers for a full-length novel. So you could, and I've written quite a lot of short stories and novellas, which, so these are 5,000 words versus, say, maybe 25,000 words to up to 50 and then 150. So what you're looking at when you look at an author's body of work is there's lots of different lengths, there's lots of different combinations. And also prolific is in the eye of the beholder. So it's so funny that you started with that question, because personally, I have a bit of imposter syndrome around the fact I haven't written enough books. Like my friend Lindsay Barocca, I'm sure you know Lindsay Barocca. She's a fantasy author. She's at the Six Figure Author podcast. And Lindsay writes like a book a month of 100,000 words each. And we started at the same time. This is the issue. We started the same year, and she has nearly 100 books, like full length books without, exactly.
What?
Yeah. So it really depends who you compare yourself with as to what prolific actually means. And I know we shouldn't compare ourselves to other people, but it is difficult.
It's inherently built in us. We will always look at someone and compare. We shouldn't. It's not very healthy, but it certainly can help. What is your preference when you're writing? Do you like doing the short form content, or do you prefer doing the long form?
Well, if we're talking about fiction specifically, it really depends on the story. So sometimes if you have an idea that's just a small idea. So one of my recent short stories, Blood, Sweat and Flame, was inspired by the Netflix series about glass blowing. It's called Blown Away. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a great series. And I didn't know anything about glass blowing. I was like, this is so cool. I want to write a story. And there was a particular person on that show. And I was like, I'm going to write a story, like a dark story about glass blowing. And it was like, but I'm in no way going to write a novel about this. So that's a short story. That's just going to be a short story. But then my main series, if you have a much bigger ideas, you need longer to flesh that out. So it is sometimes I decide in advance. Like last year, I Tomb of Relics, which is my most recent arcane thriller, that was meant to be a full-length novel. It was meant to be over 55,000, and there were a lot of reasons why it wasn't, but it ended up being about 27,000, and it was fine. Like, I thought, if I need to turn it into a full-length book, I need to pad it out. And this is something that we see in traditional publishing a lot more, because authors are told you must write 90,000 words for the book to go on the shelf. But actually, that's not, I don't think that's how it works. It works with how your author voice is, what you like to read. And I like my books fast-paced. So yeah, I think it differs, but yeah, lots of different answers really.
So you will typically go in to something, let me rephrase this. Take me from ideation to final draft. Like, you get the idea and then you're completely done. Briefly share, what's that writing process like for you?
That's like a 2-day workshop in that question.
Sorry.
But yeah, so I get my ideas from places and visual things a lot of the time. I do a lot of travel. So I'll have an idea. So let's just take a short story because that would be quicker. Is that I have an idea. I want to write a book set in this world of glass blowing. So I watched the series twice on like 2.5 speed, and then stopped it and wrote down the language around that area. And it would be the same if I was researching historical things or religious things or whatever. I do a lot of research from the initial idea, which brings in other ideas. So I love research, basically. So that's a big part of it. And then for me, I'm a discovery writer, sometimes known as a pantser, which we don't like here in the UK. It doesn't make any sense. It's an American phrase. So I like the term discovery writer. So essentially, I don't plot. I'll know a character. I'll know often an opening scene, because I write thrillers. You need to do something exciting. So I know the inciting incident as such. I will know that approximately the ending, and again it will be thriller-esque. And then I pretty much start writing, because I write my way into the story. And if it's a full-length novel, I'll usually get to around 20,000 words, and then I'll be like, hold up, I need to maybe think about where this is going, because I sort of lose the plot a little bit. But that first draft is essentially, before COVID, and now I'm back to a local cafe where I go for a few hours and I write my words, and then I come home. And I know you're into fitness, so I do a lot of exercise as well. But I write those words. I tend to try and blast out that first draft, and then I'll go into editing, which I write in Scrivener if people are interested. So Scrivener, fantastic program. So I do all the reorganization and all the drafting within Scrivener, and then I print it out and I hand edit that printed draft, and then I make all the changes, print it out again, repeat that process, then work with an editor. That's kind of where we are, I think, with the final draft. So it's a potted process.
I never thought about printing out the actual manuscript. What's the difference between, say, printing it out and just trying to do it virtually for you?
Well, I since we're on video, I have one here. Like, this is the one I just did, and you can see if I fold it. So I do 2 on one page, but if I fold it, it's like a book. So it's actually you're editing the actual book, and because I do 2 per page, it actually is the size of a book. So what you're doing when you edit on a page is you are seeing it differently than how you see it on the screen. And seriously, I mean, I do an edit on the page, and then when I've done that, then I print it out, and then my proper reorganization edit is in writing. And then, as I say, I make the updates and do it again. You literally cannot see this stuff on the screen. If you write your first draft and your second draft, whatever, on the screen, you cannot see it. Yeah. So that is really important. Also, I feel like we do too much on the screen, and it changes your brain almost to go and do it on a page, and you can't check your email on a printed page. You can't check Twitter or whatever. Yeah, sure, you'll have your phone, but you can really concentrate. And again, I will wander around the coffee shops of Bath editing by hand, and it's the only thing. It's like I'm going out with my pages and I'm editing, and that's what I do. So I think if you're trying to finish a book, like people listening, if you're trying to finish a book, then setting aside that different time and having these different modes of creation and editing can really help you kind of hack your process. So that's how I do it.
I love this. Like, honestly, I don't know why I've never picked up this tip. Tons of tips I've gotten from you over
Yeah, you've
the
written
years.
some books. I mean, you have written some books.
A few. And it's just, what? And I'm like, that makes sense because the actual physical experience is so much different than the virtual experience. So
Yes.
we essentially, like, I've been writing books formatted for ebooks, but not really for print books. Oh, you're blowing my mind. That's it. That's the end of the podcast. We are so done.
Well, then I'll just add another little point, which is
Please.
now I also edit for audio, because editing for audio is really important these days in that you're editing for repeated sounds as well as repeated words, and that makes a huge difference. So and I've got there's a load of stuff on editing for audio. That's another podcast, but I think now I realize that these three ways, ebooks, paperback, hardback, print books, and audio, these are different modes that the listener and the reader is in. So we have to consider that when we're creating our products. How does it land? So for example, you writing nonfiction with tables and figures, and people can put technical things in, which just doesn't come across in audio. So you almost have to rewrite things for audio. And the same in fiction. Like, one of the classic recommendations is just use said. Joe said, Dale said, but the word said, when you're a reader, you skip over it, you don't even see it. But when you are listening, it's a repeated sound, said. So the listener will stop listening if you use repeated words and sounds like that. So yeah, we are creating professional products, so we have to think about that.
Okay, I'm curious now. An audiobook, what are you replacing said with? Do you think about the tone in which you are delivering it? So
No,
it could be
no, this is
exclaimed or...
No, this is an advanced writing tip here, right here. A beginner writer will have exclaimed or whatever.
Okay.
But the more advanced writer will use action. The main thing is that the reader or listener understands who is speaking. Okay. So it doesn't matter how you do that. A dialogue tag, Dale said, isn't necessary if we had Dale walk to the window, open quote, I love this town, full stop, close quote. You haven't had to say Dale said at all. We know it's Dale speaking. So that's the tip. That's the advanced tip for dialogue, is it just needs to be clear who's speaking. You don't need to say Dale said warmly or Dale exclaimed or whatever.
Oh my gosh. Like, see, I've only ever narrated my nonfiction audiobooks. And this was actually due to a large part and because you started doing your own audiobooks, and they're really good. They're very well produced. Like, I enjoy it. I feel like I'm in a private conversation with you. But now you've just you blew my mind on fiction. I was like, oh, I'm going to do my own. Nope, not gonna. But I would definitely love to see about formatting in a way that makes sense, that it almost comes off as an audio screenplay, for lack of better words. Instead of saying said, you don't see people saying he said. They were just watching a movie, a show, such like that. Wow. All right, let's come back just a little bit. You briefly touched on it. I'd like to kind of hang about here for just a minute here. What inspires you most when you're writing? Like, where are your ideas? For instance, like, I have ideas from my dreams. Kevin Tomlinson, a mutual friend of ours, gets inspired by his book titles. What's something that inspires you?
Well, it really is place, traveling and sense of place. And I'm very lucky to live in Europe, where we have very deep history. So if I go to Tomb of Relics, for example, I wasn't able to travel, surprisingly, during the pandemic. So I walked from London to Canterbury, following a sort of ancient medieval pilgrimage route from the Canterbury Tales to Canterbury Cathedral, which where Thomas Becket was murdered in the 12th century. And when I did that walk, because I was going COVID crazy, have to get out the house type thing. And then when I was at the cathedral, I thought about what I could do in the cathedral as a setting. So if there's a body in the cathedral now, what would it be? And then I thought about the relics of Becket, I love religious relics. They are the weirdest thing. These are body parts or blood or, bones from religious figures that are venerated and believed to have power. So it was like, okay, well, let's do something cool with the relics. And so essentially I'm inspired by going places. Or watching things like the example of Blood, Sweat and Flame, but most often it's going places and then enmeshing myself in that. So another one, a Tree of Life, we went to Amsterdam. Me and my husband went to Amsterdam a few years back, and we always go to synagogues. I love Jewish history. My husband's Jewish, and so we went to the synagogue in Amsterdam, and it was Portuguese, and I was like, what the hell is a Portuguese synagogue doing in Amsterdam? And then in their bookshop, I found a book called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. And I was like, what is going on here? There's a Portuguese synagogue, there's Pirates of the Caribbean. What is happening? And that just led me down a kind of rabbit hole into the Portuguese Empire. And then I went to Lisbon in Portugal on a research trip and found more things for the book. And basically following rabbit holes of what is historical truth or religious myth and through history can turn into a really interesting story. Now, I don't write historical books, I write modern thrillers, but everything I write is inspired by a lot of this deep history, and there's so much of it.
That's so cool. So it's almost like you're seeing some of these historically accurate things and going, what if?
Yes, and a lot of fiction is what if.
Yeah.
Or all of fiction is what if, basically. Take something and then say, what if this happened instead? Or, what if that person behaved that way?
So, all right, you talked about your research process, and this gets me to thinking like how you're organizing everything. So your books are known for blending thriller fiction with real world historical facts and actual global locations, but how do you produce that in a first draft? Because it seems like a lot of upfront work, or maybe are you doing the work after you've produced the first draft?
As I said, I'm a discovery writer. I just do it at the time. A scrivener is life-changing for fiction writers, I think, in particular. I mean, I use it for everything, all my writing. Yeah. But because you can drag and drop things, what it means is I don't write in order. So let's say, going to Lisbon or that synagogue in Amsterdam. When I was in that synagogue in Amsterdam, I was like, I'm using this as a scene. There will be a scene in the synagogue. And because it's a series book, I know my characters. So Morgan Sierra is my main character in that book. Okay, if Morgan's in this synagogue, what's happening? So I might write a scene. As it turned out, she wasn't in that scene originally, but she was there later. And so I would write the scene. And as I'm writing it, I might have some books open, or I might do some research on open images. I'll often open images. So you can Google the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, wherever you are in the world, and you can see pictures. And in fact, post-COVID, there are so many more things online that you can roam around places virtually. Like Cologne Cathedral, I put in Tomb of Relics, and I haven't been there. I want to go there, but I couldn't get there. So I went online. So essentially and then I write the scene in Scrivener, and then I move on to another scene. And then eventually, like I said, I'll get to a point where I'll be like, I better try and rejig these scenes around. But because I'm a discovery writer, I don't do an outline. I don't plot in advance, but everyone's different that way. I think from what I've seen of your work, you're very organized and also you write a lot of non-fiction, right? And non-fiction is much more structured. And like your workout books, for example, these things are done in a certain order. Like you're not just gonna tell someone to walk in a gym and pick up 200 pounds or whatever. I don't know. So I think non-fiction can be a lot more structured, but for me personally, fiction is very organic, and the story emerges. In fact, I love Stephen King, and he says in his book On Writing that the story is like a kind of fossil that you uncover. So you find a little bit like this, and then as you uncover it some more, you'll find more of it and more and more. And that's more how I work. Now, a lot of people work completely differently, so there's no right way to write. You just have to find your own way.
It's so funny. You mentioned structure. Yeah, I'm highly structured when it comes to outlining nonfiction, but I've discovered since pivoting to fiction writing this year that I am a discovery writer. I'm using that from now
There we
on.
go.
That is my favorite. Pantser just sounds dirty. Like there's something
I
wrong.
know.
Like I've always been like, yeah, that's why I'm like, I'm on the plotter team, but like I'm over in fiction now. I'm like, okay, I've got a general idea of the direction I'm going, but discovery writer, I love it. All right, boy, our time has gone by so fast, but I would love to just get maybe one piece of advice that you could share with as many of the authors and aspiring self-publishers that are tuning in today.
Yeah, well, I think the advice is to keep going and to keep writing and to keep putting your work out there, because when I look back at where I was in 2006, I didn't have any clue where I would turn up now. I mean, life keeps unfolding, and there will always be other things that you can do other than write, because let's face it, there are easier ways to make a living. There are easier ways to kind of, you can take a picture and that's really quick, and writing a novel takes a long time, especially at the beginning, but where you are. But you will improve, you will find readers, you might make some money, you will keep getting ideas, you will find your voice, and you will find the things that interest you, and you will get the bug. I never thought I would even write fiction, and now I have so many ideas in my idea queue, it is ridiculous. So yeah, I would just say to people starting out, keep going, keep writing, do a little bit, keep going.
Big shout out and thank you to Joanna for taking some time to spend a little bit of time with us to talk about our favorite things in self-publishing. Folks, make sure you go over and subscribe to the Creative Penn podcast. It is available on YouTube and every major podcasting platform. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. Joanna is just a breath of fresh air, and she's always got so many great and deep insights into the world of writing and self-publishing. Till next week, I want to thank you so much for tuning into these interviews. And boy, I've got a lot more in the works, so make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast. See you next week.